Welcome to The Conflict, a YouTube channel dedicated to explaining the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My name is Dr. Arnon Degani, and I'm a historian. Last episode, we discussed our outlook on objectivity and bias. In this video, I'd like to describe what I see as the algorithm that has guided the twists and turns of this conflict from its inception. As I'm sure you know, countless books have been written about this conflict. Some emphasize its ethnic dimensions, while others emphasize religion or economics. But despite all this abundant material I could draw from, I always find myself returning to the one short text that I believe captures the conflict's essence. It doesn't talk about specific events. Instead, it's an observation about the overall conflict's core, its DNA, if you will, or its algorithm. It's called The Iron Wall, and it was written by one very special Russian Jew. His name was Vladimir Ze'ev Jabotinsky, and he can be described as the intellectual father of the Israeli right. Huh? Father of the Israeli right-wing Zionism? You must be asking yourself, didn't you just say that you'll be doing your best not to lead your viewers to support one side over the other? How will the father of right-wing Zionism help me develop a dispassionate approach to the entire conflict? You'd be surprised. Hear me out. Jabotinsky's analysis may not be as pro-Israel as you may think. Vladimir Ze'ev Jabotinsky was born in 1880 in Odessa, Ukraine, at the time part of the Russian Empire. Let's not get into that conflict. Jabotinsky joined the Zionist movement in 1903 when he signed up for the Jewish Self-Defense Organization in the face of a wave of anti-Semitic pogroms or riots sweeping across the Russian Empire. He spent the First World War as a soldier in the Jewish Legion, a group of Jewish volunteers who helped the British Army fight the Ottomans. One of the results of this war, most relevant to our series, is that the British ended up controlling Palestine, or the land of Israel, under what was known as the British Mandate of Palestine. It was through the Jewish Legion that Jabotinsky first arrived in the Middle East and quickly became active in the Zionist movement. From his earliest years, Jabotinsky loved languages and dreamed of becoming a writer. He published poems and articles in the Russian and Italian press, and he had a way with words. By the time he published The Iron Wall in 1923, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict had already seen two serious clashes between Palestinian Arabs, the majority population of the land, and the growing Zionist community. The Iron Wall is Jabotinsky's opposition manifesto to the policies of the Zionist organization, the main governing body of the Jewish community in Mandate Palestine. Jabotinsky supported a hardline Zionist approach to dealing with the local Palestinian Arabs. He opposed the Zionist mainstream, which advocated for negotiation and compromise with the Palestinian Arabs because he was certain that an agreement with the Palestinians would be out of reach. To prove this point, his article's opening paragraph lays out Jabotinsky's central claim on the conflict's essence. He writes,
"But it is a different question altogether, whether peaceful intentions can be carried into effect in a peaceful way. The answer to this question has nothing to do with our relationship to the Arabs. It will solely be determined by the Arabs' attitude toward Zionism."
There's something that sounds unfair in this opinion. Really? Only the Palestinians are expected to change? Only the Palestinians need to become less antagonistic? Jabotinsky seems to imply that the Jewish side is open to compromise while the Arabs are inherently aggressive. In Israel today, many people hold similar opinions. Many Israelis see their society as open to compromise and peace while viewing the Palestinians as stubborn and extremists. But if we continue reading Jabotinsky's argument, we find that it is based on a radically different approach than the contemporary Israeli right. Jabotinsky is undoubtedly a hawk, but his article displays a surprising degree of understanding or empathy towards the Palestinians. Ironically, it is precisely Jabotinsky's attempt to understand the Palestinians, to walk in their shoes, that leads him to advocate for his more aggressive Zionism. In other words, Jabotinsky's readiness to look at the world from the Palestinians' perspective leads him to the conclusion that they ought to be less open to compromise with the Zionists. To explain the Palestinian position, Jabotinsky compares the Jewish-Arab conflict with a series of similar struggles between European settlers and indigenous groups across the world. Yes, you heard me right. In Jabotinsky's analysis, not personal conviction, the Zionists are the invading settlers and the Palestinians are the natives. He compared the Zionists to the Puritan pilgrims displacing the Native Americans. He compared the Zionists to the Spanish conquistadors fighting the Aztec Empire. Like the American cowboys versus the Lakota and the Apache. Now, it's important to emphasize that unlike many anti-Zionists who adopt these parallels, Jabotinsky very much believed in Jewish patrimony over the land of Israel. He didn't consider European Jews as foreigners. But, and this is important, he understood that engaging in a level-headed analysis of the conflict requires a sincere consideration of the other side's perspective, the Palestinian perspective. And once Jabotinsky does this, he admits that the Palestinians don't really care about the Zionist justification, intention, motivation, or ancient history. The way the Palestinians see it, they are Palestine's indigenous inhabitants. They were here first. From their perspective, they are the rightful owners of Palestine. And the story. Digging deeper into Jabotinsky's Iron Wall reveals another important finding. Decades before the mainstream Zionist movement recognized the existence of a Palestinian nation separate from the broader Arab world, Jabotinsky understood that the Arabs of Palestine held a unique national connection to their homeland. He even referred to them as Palestinian Arabs. He recognized that the Palestinians felt connected to Palestine, not Damascus, Baghdad, or any other place in the wider Arab world. So, according to Jabotinsky, since the Palestinians consider themselves indigenous, they'll never ever consider negotiating with the Zionists. They'll never give up their land just like that, no matter what historical or religious claims the Jewish bring to the negotiating table. In short, at least in Jabotinsky's time, there was no point in trying to reach a compromise. So what's the solution? Jabotinsky argues that the Zionists need to build an iron wall, a metaphor for military might, that will protect the Zionist community against inevitable Palestinian resistance. Up until now, this conclusion probably sounds pretty similar to how Israelis see the Palestinians today. In Hebrew, it's common to say, ein partner, which means there's no partner. There's nobody on the other side to make peace with. But Jabotinsky finishes with a surprising twist. He argues that after many years, when, should the iron wall prove to be sturdy, the Palestinians will realize that they'll never be able to expel the Jews. At that moment in time, the conflict's dynamics will change. Moderate Palestinian leaders who recognize that Zionism is here to stay will emerge, and they will announce their readiness to negotiate. Or, as Jabotinsky puts it,
it is only when there is no longer any hope of getting rid of us, because they can make no breach in the iron wall. Not till then will they drop their extremist leaders, whose watchword is never, and the leadership will pass to the moderate groups, who will approach us with a proposal that we should both agree to mutual concessions. Then we may expect them to discuss honestly practical questions, so that both peoples can live together in peace, like good neighbors.
This series will follow the progression of the conflict, and already now I can tell you, for the first half of the period, we will witness Jabotinsky's prophecy materialize. Amongst the Zionists, there is somewhat of an openness on the scope and content of the project, while the Palestinians are much less willing to share their homeland. Jabotinsky tells us this is not because the Palestinians are particularly stubborn or belligerent, and of course, they are not anti-Semitic. It's because they saw no reason to split the ownership of the land with someone who recently came from Eastern Europe. During the early years of the Zionist movement, the Palestinians and the broader Arab world stubbornly denied the idea of a Jewish right to settle in the land, and once Israel was created in 1948, they refused to recognize its right to exist. But then, in 1967, after Israel's victory in the Six-Day War, the surrounding Arab states began a long and non-linear path of accepting Israel's right to exist. The Palestinians continued to fight Israel, but at a certain point, Israeli resilience brought different voices within the Palestinian national movement. In 1988, after suffering multiple setbacks, the PLO, at the time, the only representative body of the Palestinian people, agreed to recognize Israel's right to exist. Exactly how Jabotinsky predicted. Exactly? Not quite. Had Jabotinsky been entirely correct, the conflict would have been solved in 1988. What happened? Why was Jabotinsky only partially right? The algorithm described in the Iron Wall had, in my opinion, 3 blind spots. The first, Jabotinsky was right about the Palestinians eventually coming to terms with the Israeli steadfastness and slowly moderating their positions. But Jabotinsky, in 1923, could not have predicted the Holocaust, which would create generations of Zionists harboring existential fears. After that, the escalation of the conflict with the Palestinians after 1923, the years of violence and bloodshed and losses, all of these will cultivate among Israelis a nationalist camp distrustful and resentful of the Palestinians. The second Jabotinsky blind spot is that he failed to factor into his algorithm the fact that a Palestinian willingness to compromise would not come from all the Palestinians. In reality, only one faction among the Palestinians would be willing to come to terms with Israel. Others would not. They will do things to sabotage the likelihood of some sort of Palestinian-Israeli compromise. Together with the Israeli faction unwilling to compromise, these two extremes would make an Israeli-Palestinian settlement difficult. For the third problem in Jabotinsky's algorithm, the Iron Wall, as a metaphor for military strength, suggests defensiveness. But as the cliche goes, attack is the best form of defense. And so Israeli military actions through the years were not, to say the least, always defensive. They didn't convey a willingness to invite the Palestinians to the negotiating table someday. As we begin to tell the story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we'll witness how Zionists initially displayed some flexibility over their political project, seek some sort of compromise with the population already there. We'll also see that as the Iron Wall predicted, the local population was not eager to share the land with newcomers. After these two rivals butt heads for a few long decades, time will change them and shape them. It will create among them, both Zionists and Palestinians, camps willing to compromise and hardliners. By the time the Palestinians show willingness to compromise, the Israelis are at a different place. They will have become the indigenous, less willing to compromise. And at more violent times, the militant people of one side will prop the political power of the militants on the other side. So we have to think about this conflict not simply as just two rivals colliding, but as rivals who, as they collide, they change to their very core. Throughout this series, we'll see that as Zionists and Palestinians fight each other through the decades, Zionism and Palestinian nationalism will change drastically. Next episode, we'll talk about the primordial soup of Zionism. So subscribe and join us into the conflict.